I use the UPIC not only as a graphic synthesizer, transforming drawings into sounds, but also the way back, transforming sounds into workable drawings. And I intend to suggest my reasons for such a choice. Being here in an important temple of technology, applied to composition, I realized that a great amount of the facts and statements I will bring forward and are already familiar to many among you. But as the original form of the UPIC is now more a memory than a still available device, and since I may have been its first user, or one of the very first after Xenakis, I must begin reminding you of some historic landmarks which characterize the origins of the UPIC system and justify the way I intended to make use of it. Xenakis had abandoned Schaeffer's Groupe de Recherche Musicale in 1962. He was disappointed by the hostility of Schaeffer against Bohor, a piece dedicated to him, though. He was as well hurt by Boulet's criticism of his piece Eonta in 1963 and started teaching the same year in the US at Tanglewood and then at Bloomington. But neither Schaeffer nor Boulez nor his American employers were willing to support his project of a center devoted to music synthesis by digital means. His use of mathematics and references to physics had to remain purely intellectual, till eventually he could found in 1966 the EMAMU, Équipe de mathématiques et d'automatique musicale, with the support of 3 high-level computer scientists and philosophers like Dufresne, Frances, Revaud-Dallon, and Claude Lévi-Strauss. The EMAMU, first hosted in the École pratique des hautes études, was connected to the nuclear physics laboratory of the Collège de France in 1969, thanks to Le Prince Ringuet. The same year, 1969, Xenakis was requested by Georges Pompidou to collaborate with Pierre Boulez in a new institution called IRCAM, devoted to science allied to music, and they both publicly presented the project. But soon, Boulez, being more skillful than Xenakis at dealing with politicians, got rid of Xenakis and remained the only responsible of IRCAM. In 1972, the EMAMU became the CEMAMU, which at last was equipped with a digital analogic converter built by the Centre National d'Études des Télécommunications. And here I had presented a certain amount of things you have been listening lately, so maybe I should drop this paragraph. You already know the basic system. The amount of arcs has not been mentioned. I should do it. In a single page, you can have up to 2,024 arcs. That's a lot. And one page had 128 envelopes possible together. And the normal ambitus of a page was 6 octaves, but it could as well be fixed to 10 octaves, including infra and ultra sounds. Or, on the contrary, a very small interval, for example, on a half tone. The scheme is on the screen. And then, in the same year, in 1972, I had composed Gorvar for harpsichord and tape. The tape organized sounds taken from speech in Xhosa, frogs, birds, boars, whales, and rain. I also published a paper entitled La musique est une fonction biologique. Music is a biological function. Well, I'm telling that just to let you know what was the context of my use of UPIC and of the UPIC itself, even for other users. The main themes of my paper then were: there's no purely acoustic difference between noise and music, or between natural sound and man-made music. What means is an encounter between thought and sounds, which depends chiefly from context. The musical atom is neither a note nor any quantum, but a quale, a difference similar to existing one between phonetics and phonology. Music is not basically a message, but a biological function which is not entirely limited to the human species and which probably has its roots in playing. And 4, Cage is wrong in rejecting any voluntary action on the sounds. Nature alone acquires a meaning when responding to man's respectful action. The same year, I shared with Xenakis a monographic issue of the review L'Arc, where I published a paper entitled Xenakis and Nature. We were close friends, but we had different orientations. Xenakis appreciated nature as much as I did rationality, but with different outcomes. I was both willing to support the UPIC and curious of exploring its possibilities someday, in spite of a basic distrust about any systematic approach such as serialism. My experience of musique concrète since 1958 had taught me that there is often something more interesting and rich in acoustic, natural sounds than in synthesized a priori structures following some system. In 1977, 2 years before the appearance of the first digital sampler by Fairlight, I started exploring the UPIC, that is, the first version of it. At that time, it was far from real-time computing and needed long waits, as has been told lately, long waits before one could discover the sounds corresponding to the drawing of a page. I particularly realized that remarkable drawings did not assure remarkable sounds at all, or even simply meaningful results, and that they often conveyed misleading illusions. This is on a tracing paper, a page I wrote in exactly December 12, 77, one of my first approach of the UPIC. And on this paper, you have 5 octaves from bottom to top, and that means that 1 centimeter corresponds to 1/2 tone. A little later, Xenakis composed Mycène Alpha, the first piece entirely made on the UPIC, which had its premiere on the 2nd of August at Mycenes in Greece, where the composer was at last authorized to return 30 years after his death sentence. Here you have already seen a drawing, which is above, and the other one is taken from a Leonardo da Vinci notebook, just to show that we share with Xenakis some common interest in the natural phenomena, and that in Mycène Alpha above, there is something which can be inspired by the movements of water in the rivers. In 1979, I heard of the first digital sampler. Unfortunately, its cost was exceedingly high, and as such, first reserved to entertainment music. The same or next year, Publison in France commercialized its DHM 89B2 and KB 2000, later nicknamed as the French Infernal Machine, an English name probably so as to look more serious and reliable, and it had an immediate success. I talked about it to Xenakis, who taught me that the UPIC had an analytical feature that might yield some comparable results. Among the other possibilities, the DHM offered a harmonizer, an envelope generator, an evolutive vibrato, a delay, a reverb, etc. The keyboard allowed something interesting, a separate treatment of pitch and duration. For example, automatically keeping the duration of a sample when transposing its pitch. I used that in the finale of Olodi in 1982, where a soloist synchronizes in unison with the complex rhythms of two recorded tracks. You see how it looked above the DHM and down keyboard 2000. This is the use I made of this primitive digital device. The tempo is rather fast, so if you want to follow, be prepared. What is in green is recorded sounds from the keyboard 2000, and the top stave is the soloist here on a soprano saxophone played by a wonderful player from the Berlin Philharmonic, Mrs. Ruth Welton. So from she moves from one part to the other at the unison, which is not so easy. This is the context where I worked with the UPIC. So you see that my use of a pentatonic scale was not at all in the mood at that time. I must now mention some other details of the historic context in order to explain where my expectancy is about the UPIC. In March 1980, Xenakis was the supervisor of my doctorate upon the idea of model in today's music. 4 months later, I got a commission for a music accompanying an exhibition near Avignon, whose theme was water. And I composed for phonographie de l'eau, a term I had coined already 17 years before to refer to an art in parallel with music, just like photography was in parallel with painting. Wochenende by Walter Ruttmann in 1930, a talking movie without pictures, being probably the first example of such an art. My phonographies accompanied the exhibition from July 4th, 1980. One of them, entitled Proteus, I think you made an allusion to it, or maybe, no, it's the same, used the possibility which then existed of the UPIC of sampling a sound, but it could simply change its rhythm. The possibility of sampling a sound, but only changing the rhythm, not changing the pitch. The UPIC worked already as a crude sampler in this meaning respecting the pitch of the sound but allowing some rhythmic invention. Unfortunately, I was the only composer interested in such a function, which soon disappeared from the new models of UPIC. Otherwise, the UPIC could easily have developed a full sampling function. And here is a small extract from this phonography of different amphibians. One of them is rhythmic, not as it is in nature, but thanks to the UPIC. This was certainly heretic compared with Cage's statement that you let the sounds be as they are. My interest in nature was to get ideas from nature and to help nature to reveal the music it had inside. At that time, Jean-Claude Eloi composed Point, Ligne, Paysage on the UPIC, and I myself composed Hyperion entirely on the same system. On Xenakis' request, I was teaching at Paris 1 University a course entitled Music Composition in the Biosphere. In tune with my practice of natural models, I used the ability of the UPIC to extract two features from different sounds: dynamic envelope and spectrum waveform. Most of my models were different animals, plus a few non-European instruments like the Ethiopian bagana. For the second time, I used a technology allowing to analyze natural models with greater accuracy than pure listening. I had done something like that in 1964 with a K-electric spectrograph allowing speech analysis in Le son d'une voix, a piece stemmed from a phonetic model which Michael Gielen conducted at the Royan Festival, and which anticipated the spectral school by some 10 years. Here are some envelopes and extracted from sound models, animal sound models. For example, the upper left, it's not an envelope, it's a spectrum. It's taken from a marsh warbler, Acrocephalus palustris, in French, rousserolle verderolle. And the next one is a complex envelope of white-faced storm petrel, in French, frégate, and scientific name Pelagodroma marina. You have a still more complex envelope from an amphibian, which is the frog Ula cinerea. And late one from the bagana, which is the high lyre, Ethiopian lyre.
How long are the sounds for the envelopes?
They have no length at all, since they are envelopes and waveforms. So the time is up to the page to give them. You can decide that one envelope will last 1 hour. Why not? If you're not too much bored. And or you can decide it will last a tenth of a second. While experiencing some morphing, that is combining dynamic envelopes and waveforms coming from different analyses, I noticed that using complex envelopes with simple waveforms was much more efficient than the opposite, complex waveforms with simple envelopes. And the nature of synthetic timber did not so much depend on the common view of steady spectrum contents, but chiefly on the multiple small dynamic movements of the envelope. At the same time, Jean-Claude Risset was scientifically developing his analysis of sounds and could describe the same phenomenon with great accuracy, leading henceforth to more subtle synthesis of acoustic instruments. The beginning sequence of Hyperion, which has already been heard by you, is made with the simplest sine waveform with complex envelopes and with a background using slow, continuous glissandi. That was shown the first time on November 4th, 1980, in Lille, and next year in Paris. Here is a series of simple waveforms, and much simpler than the envelopes I've shown you. And this is a page from Hyperion. And a special problem is how to get a sound which has some life in itself, which is not just a dull going on. And one means was to make on each pitch an accumulation of different envelopes and dynamics. So how can you, on this kind of page, how can you write unisons? That was a pure practical problem, and I solved it by inventing a small convention for beginning and end of each particular pitch in unison with others. Donc each one has a different envelope, a different dynamic, and so on. So the same year as for Hyperion in 1981, I tried an experience quite different for Nocturne, a piece for piano and tape. The electronic tape was made on the UPIC as a complex canon of melodic contours. A basic outline of some 20 arcs was varied at different durations, registers, ambitus, intervals, and waveforms, initiating complex canonic counterpoints between the soloist and the tape, and between different layers on the tape itself. The intervals of the contour could change in many waves without ever, though, changing their direction. So this is one page of Nocturne. The piano, written as P, on 2 staves, and the tape, entirely made on the UPIC, above, Egal also on 2 staves, but sometimes the piano is at unison with the tape, sometimes it's something more than the tape, and the difficulty as the tape is made with superposition of different tempi, there is no other means than drawing to get some synchronization between the soloist and the tape. So that's why there are no bars written, but some arrows showing where they should be exactly together, and after that, inshallah. The idea of such a particular canon of contour had some affinities on one hand with Xenakis' arborescence, as in Cinephi in 1969, and on the other hand with Mandelbrot's fractals, which at that time had been more and more fashionable among artists for 10 years or so. After 1983, I more rarely used the UPIC, in spite of the new possibilities of listening in real time the results of drawings, which transformed it in a kind of music instrument, fit for the stage at that time. The reason is that samplers were now becoming affordable, and I thought they could cumulate the benefits of handling any kind of sounds and scale, in a scale, with the flexibility of the music instruments, while conquering all the liberty to overcome their limits and routines. Hence, from 1983 on, my use of the French infernal machine, which I already mentioned, and as soon the Mirage was in sale, I managed to buy one. That was in 1985, which was also the year when the UPIC workshop was founded. I managed it for several years, and in France and abroad, it hosted a great amount of training sessions, concerts, resident foreign composers, and additional activities, of which you had a good description this afternoon. 2 years before, I had been elected professor of musicology and director of the music department of Strasbourg University. There, I could raise the funds to buy a UPIC system, and in 1987, in that university, I organized a curriculum called Primus, which was still missing in France, in order to train tonmeister, sound engineers like in Germany, capable of reading a score, of possibly writing one themselves. For the examinations, I asked them to do so, and of managing recording and post-recording sessions. They also learned to work with the UPIC system. We had it along with a Fairlight VT5 voice tracker bought in January 1986. The voice tracker transformed sounds into MIDI data. Personally, I owned a Commodore computer, poor Commodore, very simple computer. That was in May 1986. And soon I got a better sampler than the Mirage, namely an Akai S900, which I use for my pieces Aliunde, Tempora, and Kangir from 1987 to 1991. Among the samples, I used many which were borrowed from the UPIC. So I used, from then, I used the UPIC as a provider of sounds, which I manage thanks to samplers. I no longer use the drawing table. Tempora, for example, was written for 3 samplers, each one with a MIDI keyboard, and they played animal sounds as well as synthetic or acoustic samples, all working as imaginary instruments. I believed that whole orchestras made of or including samplers would soon be available and grant electronic sounds the same possibility of expression which the traditional acoustic instruments had kept. The UPIC itself would acquire the flexibility of a real-time music instrument. The commonplace of endless crossfades between audio fluxes would no longer be the main way of developing an electronic work. What a deception, when I soon realized that such a beautiful dream was hopeless. Everything in the electronic business, and specifically in the digital acoustic domain, was ruled by the unique obsession with profit. And for that, with innovation at all cost, be it smoke and mirrors or real. And that this made programmed obsolescence a kind of a rule. For many electronic compositions, the only hope for a long survival is henceforth inevitably brought back to unchanging recordings, since porting to new sampling platforms is hardly possible, and anyhow, even when successful, doomed again to lower and lower life expectancy. Most of time, digital archives will die before their authors. As regards the UPIC, its current survival in the University of Rouen, under the new form of UPIC for Windows in 2001, and more recently for other platforms like with the UP Sketch in some smartphones, I believe, is so far one of the few notable exceptions. My last commitment for a composition entirely made with UPIC was in 1987, when I started composing Titon, the piece which is going to be played in tonight's concert. In 1980, in a Greek island, I had the opportunity of making a close recording of an interesting insect, probably a wart-biter, Decticus verruciforus, which had ventured into my house. Contrary to the monotony of many insects, the song of this one was rhythmically varied and containing even a hidden melody. I decided to adopt it as a model. Here are some extracts of its song and of the treatments I applied on them, thanks to the UPIC and some other devices. Here is one original. If I was a teacher in solfeggio, I would show that to explain what is a rubato. The same at a slower pace, so -1 octave. Here is another recording, faster. So I discovered that when I made a spectrogram of it, I discovered that there was a kind of hidden melody. And with the help of Audioscult, the software elaborated by the IRCAM, I could obtain the image you see, and which corresponds to this kind of sound. Now, if you think it's still too animal, you can try to humanize it this way. You go a little further from the model, and then you play. But I didn't do it, I just show it for fun. But I could do it thanks to Melodyne. wonderful German software which you probably know, which transforms any sound into MIDI data. And Titon, which is entirely made with insect models, is not a program music, even if the title refers to a beautiful Greek legend, which I cannot help telling. Dawn is in love with Titonos, a beautiful Trojan prince, brother of Priam, and nephew of Ganymedes. He is also in love with her since the day when she abducted him one morning while he was leading his flock. At that time, princes would also be shepherds. Sometime after, they had 2 children, and Dawn started feeling worried about their future. Her husband Titonos, being a nephew of Ganymedes, had an access to Olympus. She decided to beg Zeus to grant Titonos immortality. Zeus is usually very thrifty for such a favor, but he accepted, taking into account the extended distinguished service of Dawn. The only problem was that she forgot to also require eternal youth for her lover. Day after day, Titonos was decaying, till he shriveled and shrunk to such an extent as he became a poor grey thing hanging to some sprigs, hereinafter referred to as a cicada. But he is still in love with Dawn and will greet her loud and clear every morning. Titon is not a program music, but nearly every sound originated in insect recordings. The piece is imbued with different moods, typically blooming in summer, like insect songs. And here is a page corresponding to Titon, and you see here a canon of contours. The same complex contour, probably you can see the green one more clearly than the others. This contour is repeated at different pitches, different ambitus, and with different envelopes and waveforms. Each color here representing a particular waveform for the chosen contour. The figures you see on the left is a code telling which number of envelope with which number of waveform. It's just for memory. Now, after mentioning a last use of UPIC samples for my string quartet Moire in 1994, I should like to move from an historic recapitulation to a tentative reflection about the future of what UPIC and the like represent. In spite of their many drawbacks, there are so many benefits in computer music and bioinformatics that I think they will not be abandoned. With data processing, the composer can conceive as a whole the laws of assembly and the sound identity of what is assembled. Instead of dealing with all the limited possibilities and constraints which a music instrument would offer, it seems that he has no further limits but those of his own competences and imagination. He can charge the computer with producing such or such sequence or preset sounds events according to laws which he will have formalized in a program. And this program, for example, can itself present all the complexity and the training ability of a neural network. Instead of subjecting his writing to the auditive anticipation of the result in the future execution time, he can launch algorithms whose final sound realization is not entirely anymore foreseeable. This approach, which as lately as yesterday allured more than one follower of musical data processing, presents the double character of a total rationalization, because everything, until the indetermination, must be specified in a program, and paradoxically, of an adventure where what is produced by the computer has the multifariousness and sometimes mysterious character of one's second dummy nature. Instead of composing a work, some aim at composing a program suitable to generate an infinity of achievements. One will thus explore the algorithms of which he believed being the author, arousing an external universe of a strangeness, sometimes threatening. An approach which ends up returning the composer, so at least he was not absorbed there in the attractive illusion of an absolute power, with his most traditional and least rational responsibilities: the taste, the intuition, the experiment, the aptitude to feel in advance the emotions which he will organize in the duration, the aptitude, all capacities without which no choice is legitimate nor even possible among the sometimes innumerable proposals of the machine. The formalization of the such selection criteria would be possible in its turn only if the knowledge of the human brain were completed, a still remote utopia. Thus, the way followed for 1/2 century by musical data processing has not been without reminding of certain aspects of what the revolution of writing music had been producing near the end of the 14th century. The proportional notation had then proposed to the successors of Mâche much more than the facilities for which it had been elaborated. The creative power of the machine, as Michel Philippot said, had already appeared avant la lettre with what the musicologist Ursula Günther baptized the ars subtilior. This term indicates the complex musical experiments of the generation of 1400. Rhythmic refinements often came from a temptation to push to the extreme the potential of a writing so as to see what they would produce. I have a recording if you're interested, and if you give me some time, but after, if I can. In a somewhat comparable way, some 6 centuries after, the computer contributed to prolong the experimental spirit which had dominated the 50s and 60s of the 20th century by proposing novel facilities. It's, however, necessary to be disillusioned a little when certain provisional appraisals are made. The computer certainly allows incredible time savers, but a short handling error can also sometimes cause the instantaneous loss of several work days. The complexity of certain software involves sometimes anomalies that the best data processing specialists fail to identify, even with the help of their best software of repair. Sorry if I am flogging a dead horse in form of so many experts, writers. Paradoxically, the sound synthesis transformed the production of amazing sonorities into a kind of standardized category. Those, as a result, lost so much of their attraction that they could be used as negative argument in favor of some reactionary aesthetic choices. Whereas it's easy to simulate an organ or a vibraphone, almost to perfection. For their part, the synthetic string instruments avoid with difficulty appearing caricatural. And in any case, the results always come out of loudspeakers, with the constraints and the characteristics inherent in these transmitters. Data processing seems dedicated to rather provide prostheses to the acoustic instruments than to replace them. And it is the CAD, computer-aided design, which is undoubtedly one of the best possible users of the computer, wisely retrogressed from the role of demiurge to that of secretary. It can help to outline and write scores without the listener suspecting even its intervention. Even on this ground, the commercial availability of innumerable software of harmonization, orchestration, arrangement, composition can unfortunately support, along with some advantage of amateurism, a certain idleness of mind. By spreading an illusion of creativity which would put up with a sleep of imagination and a careless listening, it often causes sound floods where the best is drawn into the worst. Matching the irresponsibility of the listener, transformed into passive and inattentive consumer, looms the irresponsibility of composers fascinated by the complex proliferation of sounds of which they control neither the birth nor the evolution. In other cases, on the contrary, their irresponsibility consists in getting a completely formalized control of a production process without much worrying about the thought or the absence of thought which will result for those which he is supposed to address. To overestimate an algorithm so much that you dare not improve its productions, or to decide that these principles are more important than the listening of their robots. The composer, as a data processing specialist, is finally always constrained to admit that the music is completely formalizable only at the cost of one sometimes dangerous reduction. The principal challenge with which data processing confronts by so much facilitating certain tasks to him is to have to reflect, rather than about the difficulties inherent in his work, even about its very finality. Ultimately, music, like any art, rests on the desire, which is much more fundamental than the intelligence. Data processing gives the opportunity to check what the ancient Greeks already knew. Eros, born much before Zeus and Athena, is nevertheless always young. Data processing, be it with UPIC or any other device, should remind the artists that they should be still rather philosophers than technocrats. Personally, I always tried to combine my interest in the powerful computer resources with a vision broader than technology or language. They maintain the musician, creative, and listener in the circle of the social relationships and social emotions, while music has also a more mysterious function of harmony with nature, not only with the feelings, but also with the consciousness of the limits and the natural requests to harmonize with the invention in order to avoid the divorce of mankind with nature. Music can contribute to spare us certain disadvantages of hybridization with the artificial intelligences. But that would be the subject of another lecture. I thank you for allowing me to propose this one and listening patiently to it.
Merci mille fois.
C'est un calque. This is a tracing paper which was put on the table, the UPIC table. It's a page for my nocturne. You can have it and give it back.
And in the meantime, are there any questions? Maestro Frijus, I've never heard you so silent. You're listening, but I'm sure you've had some thoughts provoked, yes? No, okay. Anyone else? Alain? Wow. It was so beautiful and so so important. I have one or two little questions. Just from a practical level, and thank you for addressing your using UPIC as a teaching tool for the Tonmeister Primus. Thank you for addressing using UPIC in the Primus cursus in Strasbourg. How effective was that?
Well, it was first for my students. It seemed funny to try to draw, but as they had a very classical ground, they were as awkward as any other young people. And, but they succeeded in making short pieces, which were rather interesting. But unfortunately, when I left to come back to Paris and teach l'école Hautes Études, the man who came after me was not interested, and he just put it into well, I don't know, in a placard.
A closet. Remember, I was in touch with you one day. I was in Strasbourg for some recordings, and somebody told me to go into a closet and look for a special mic. And so I'm looking for the mic, and there's a UPIC. And then I remembered that you were teaching there, and I got in touch with you, and you told me a little bit about this story, but I never knew really how it entered, but now I understand, thanks to your talk today, a little bit what the students did. Cyril.
I'm sorry, it's in French, so Sharon. Vous avez quitté le GRM en 1958 et j'aurais aimé savoir si vous connaissiez les travaux de Jacques Poulain, notamment avec l'instrument qu'il avait inventé, le phonogène à clavier ou le phonogène à coulisses qui permettait de transposer des objets sonores.
I've been using it for some time in 50.
Allow me to translate the question. Cyril is asking François-Bernard, having been at JRM in 1958, whether he knew of the phonogène à coulisses in clavier. Phonogène with a slide and keyboard by Jacques Poulain.
Phonogène was a primitive means of changing the pitch without changing the duration or the contrary. So, but as it was only analogic and not at all digital, there was a great loss in the quality of the sound. But I used it, and for some time, for some moderate use, it could be useful. But I'm not sure that Jacques Poulain was the only engineer involved in it. Probably. I just cared about the use, not the making of the machine.
I have one last question. I was intrigued by one of the first sentences you said when you were talking about turning UPIC upside down, and that from sounds you would like to go towards workable drawings. And I was wondering what you meant, because at one point I was saying, oh no, François-Bernard is now going to say, I'm leaving music, I'm becoming a visual artist, the way this one became a sculptor.
Well, I think basically making music is playing. Play is something which humanity has in common with the animals. So we artists are what the biologists call neotenic creatures. Neotenic means that they keep, during all their life, some of the absurd imagination of the child. So without ever becoming really adults, like some species like the axolotl in Mexico, which can be reproduced without ever becoming an adult. They can reproduce even as the larvae.
Yeah, larvae.
Yeah. So we are larvae compared to some animals, and also it has a great advantage that we keep some fresh freedom in dealing with sounds. And if I say that, what was your question?
About drawing, sound working from sound
yes,
to
coming back to what is what is visible. Well, after I never worked again on the UPIC, but I worked sometimes with a kind of cheap imitation, which is metasynth. Metasynth, you probably know, is a commercial simplification of this possibility of transforming any drawing into sounds. And I don't know if it still exists, probably, or maybe it was not sold enough, so they dropped it. I don't know. So, but the quality of the drawing is very cheap, and the quality of the sound is medium. But it's funny to use because you can mix samples, acoustic samples, drawings, and different manipulations are more or less interesting. But as regards what is visible, I also I'm what we say a Sunday photographer, amateur photographer, and some I tried to transform some photographs into sounds, and of course it gives some results. Now the quality of the results depends not on the photograph, but on your listening and watching what is going on, because a beautiful photograph can give something completely common, and on the contrary, something not at all interesting to look at can be a good sound generator.
Well, I think it's fantastic that this, and long overdue, that tonight in this conference is the opportunity to have the German premiere from what you said, yes, of Titon. It's the German premiere, right?
Yeah, right.
So better late than never, but it's
what you're going to listen to is entirely made with acoustic models, but with many manipulations. But at the very end, the model appears itself. It's the conclusion.
Can you develop about canon de contour in Moire, your piece for UPIC and Quatuor? Is it the same process like Nocturne, or is more complex?
Canon de contour interested me because it's one of treating superposition of different tempi. And it's very simple. For example, you can have a drawing, and the same at a little lower or higher scale, and so you can have, for example, tempo 100 with tempo 110. And this is difficult for the performers, human performers, whereas you can explore this proximity and slow differences with the drawing.
And the relationships with the machine and the performers, just for Moire, there are 4 performers and machine, and 4 tempi. The relationships with the machine for the execution.
What is difficult for a performer can be done. Xenakis was the first to prove it. He was so demanding from the performers that they always said at the beginning that cannot be performed. And eventually, more or less, they could perform at least 80% of it. So, but I don't like to do that. I prefer to give something, if I can give to the performers something easy to perform, so much the better. But if the idea cannot be easily understood and achieved, then I ask the performer to make some effort, and including this superposition of tempi. For example, the wonderful harpsichordist Elżbieta Chojnacka could perform one tempo with the right hand and another one on the other keyboard of a harpsichord. And she did it.
Fine, so I think that's the end of our session today. Reminder that at 7 o'clock, is that right, Ludger? No, but 7 o'clock, there's the En Marito play, and then at 8 o'clock we have the concert in the black box. The black box.
It will be in this room, or?
No.
Oh.
The blue cube.
Blue cube.
Go the stairs up.
Ah.
And also, I believe that UP Sketch has a sort of premonition of what's coming tomorrow. The UP Sketch little station and poster explaining what it is now out just across the hall from here. So you can have a peek at that, or wait until tomorrow and we'll tell you all about it first. Thank you very much. See you later.